Ladies and gentlemen, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, dear friends, dear colleagues, it's my privilege and a real pleasure to welcome you today, and it's also a true honor to do this introduction to the day dedicated to debates and conversations organized in the context of a cultural initiative for Europe called Christine de Suède l'Européenne, no need to translate, which is the fruit of an intensive cooperation between the Austrian Embassy, l'Institut Français de Suède, the Italian Cultural Institute, and the Musique Post-Lotet. Today is part of a series of events linked to the initiative. We already started with a conference months ago at Stockholm University on the theme, the culture on the move. And hopefully we will organize another one next fall in Sweden, and some other will follow in France, Austria, and Italy. We have chosen a pretext to launch the reflection. It's the music that Christina used to listen to and to promote in a time that will be played in the 4 partner countries. The concerts will be the starting point of conferences and other events. So, the objectives of the project are to enhance a reflection and to ensure the widest possible audience for Europe of culture, to sensitize as many people as possible on what makes that Europe in its diversity, multilingualism, and its concern for developing all fields of knowledge. We believe in that Europe where citizens share the same values, the same principle of tolerance, freedom, creativity, and love for arts and science. Technical problems we are facing today being overcome, we will mobilize all necessary means to reach these objectives. A festival and an academy of music, several schools and universities are involved in the project. Exchange program will be implemented, competitions of all kinds will be organized while reaching a larger audience. A French TV channel and a filmmaker are producing a documentary and a long feature movie on Queen Christina. For today, we shall focus the reflection on 3 different aspects. First, there will be a conversation between writers who spend some time, if I may say so, in the intimacy of Queen Christina, and who can therefore talk about. Through the theme of romantic lie and historic truth, they will approach the controversial personality of this capital figure. Their point of view will certainly be of importance for the following exercise, where poetic and politic will be confronted in order to answer the double question: does Europe for culture need an emblem to federate citizens? And how Queen Christina could be that emblem, symbol, allegory? The specialists will decide on the proper term. This afternoon, young academics and decision makers will consider the impact of Queen Christina on youth today through her modernity. And to end this introduction, I would like to express special thanks to our sponsors and partners, Air France and Volksuniversität, who made this event possible. A sincere thanks to our colleagues from Austria, Austrian Embassy, Italian Cultural Institute, Musique Post-Lotet, Livrustkammaren, Stiftelsen Ung Livrustkammaren, thanks to Waltraud, Paulo, Mats, Madeleine, Sofia, and all the others. And of course, I would like to thank all the participants, speakers, moderators who came from Austria, France, Italy, and Sweden, and gave their precious time for the sake of the cultural initiative for Europe in the spirit of Queen Christina. Thank you for your attention.
Your Excellence, dear moderators and speakers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Royal Armoury, I would like to welcome you all to our museum. Some of you have been here before, while it, for others, probably is a new experience. Nevertheless, the Royal Armoury is indeed a suitable choice for this seminar, since the museum in several aspects is intimately connected to today's historical inspiration, Queen Christina and her time. The museum itself was founded by Christina's father, Gustavus Adolphus, who in 1628 decided that 2 costumes that he had worn when he was wounded during the Polish war campaign forever should be kept in the Royal Armoury as a perpetual memento of his historical mission. Later, his horse, his saddle, and blood-stained buff coat from the Battle of Lützen, where he was killed in 1632, were added to the collection. Christina was then 6 years old when she lost her father. Accordingly, in 1628, the foundation for a tradition was laid, which in the long run meant that the Royal Armoury, step by step, was changed from being a storage for weapons and horse equipment to a historical collection, a museum. In this early history of the museum, Queen Christina and the choices she made has played a somewhat unusual role. She's actually the cause of, or the woman behind, the museum's oldest inventory. The abdication of Queen Christina and her decision to leave the country suddenly made it necessary to decide what objects she actually owned and what was to be regarded as state property. This being so much more important since it before her abdication were no fixed boundaries between Christina's private possessions and the crown's. To simplify, I guess you can say that what you today find among the museum's oldest material is what she couldn't or wouldn't bring with her. So, what objects do we today have from Queen Christina here in the collection of the Royal Armoury? Mostly, these are luxurious ceremonial objects which can contribute to the official image of her, the making of a king, to use the words of Peter Burke, such as, for example, her coronation robe and canopy, as well as weapons and horse equipment from her armoury. Expensive diplomatic gifts given to the young queen are also existent. Thanks to lucky circumstances, a unique piece of garment, a little pink satin bodice, worn by Christina at the age of 1 or 2, has been saved. Don't miss it when you walk your way through the museum. It has a very special aura. These objects are all, in a way, memories of a queen who died more than 300 years ago. However, the queen herself has through the history proven to be more or less of continual current interest and put into new perspectives. A part of this fascination for Christina is probably that she was a person who is almost impossible to characterize in a few words, and the roles she played during her lifetime were many and different. In the Royal Armoury, we are currently preparing next year's large exhibition called Images of Christina. The exhibition is part of a joint project with the Vatican Library, the National Archives, the Stockholm Cathedral, and the Foreign Ministry through our ambassador to the Holy See, Miss Ulla Gudmundsson. Besides the Royal Armoury's exhibition, there will be a smaller exhibition in the Stockholm Cathedral, 2 research seminars, and a richly illustrated publication. A number of researchers, for example, Stefano Fogelberg-Rota and Susanna Åkerman, who we have here today, have been connected to the project as a reference group. The spectacular highlight in the exhibition will be some manuscripts from Queen Christina's famous manuscript collection in the Vatican Library. In the exhibition, we are exploring perceptions and images of Christina from the 17th century and up until today. What has created the various and contradictory images of the Swedish Queen? In what way has, for example, structures of power, religious issues, and gender played a role? Questions which I know for sure would be the topic of interest during some of the presentations and discussions today. And I would like to encourage you all to contact one of us among the producers. Myself, Ann Grönhammar, if you can wave over there, Director PT of the Royal Armoury, Dr. Per Sandin, somewhere in here perhaps, there he is, or Education Officer Jonas Lindvall over there, if you have some ideas or thoughts that you would like to share with us during the day. I hope and think that we will all have a very interesting seminar here today. And once again, warmly welcome to the Royal Armoury of Stockholm.
Well, buongiorno a tutti, bonjour à tous, good morning. Well, we are here today to talk about 3 books that have been published recently. The first one appeared in 2005, Die Amazon von Rom, das abenteuerliche Leben der Christina von Sweden by Gloria Kaiser. The second one came out in 2008 is Poesins drottning, Christina av Sverige och de italienska akademierna by Stefano Fogelberg Rota, while the third appeared in France in 2010, and it's a novel, L'échiquier de la Reine by Jan Kerlou. These books are very different from each other. The first one is a biography. The second one is a scientific study of Christina's role within Rome cultural life, and more precisely of her context with Italian poets like Alessandro Guidi, Francesco Delle Mene, Vincenzo da Filicaia, who will create the Academy of Arcadia. And the third one is a novel conceived as some sort of autobiography. We should have also talked today about a fourth book, published in Italy in 2011, Le passioni dell'anima. I will show you the book. The Passions of the Soul, Les Passions de l'âme, written by an eminent Italian linguist, Professor Raffaele Simone, and focused on the relationship between Christina and Descartes. Unfortunately, Professor Simone couldn't come to Stockholm due to other commitments. The amount of books about Christina that have been recently published all over Europe clearly doesn't surprise us. In fact, few historical figures have fascinated artists, scholars, musicians, film directors, and dramatists as Christina did. It's difficult not to feel attracted by Christina's rich personality and by her various and sometimes contradictory characteristics. What we get from biographies, dramas, and music pieces are many different images of Christina. The conventional Minerva of the North, generous patron of artists and scholars, the hysterical, spendthrift, fickle, and lustful Christina, on which many biographers focused in the 19th century, the bloodthirsty and pitiless Christina, who got Monaldesco killed in the Deer Gallery in Fontainebleau Castle. Well, I would like to start this roundtable discussion with a simple question, but at the same time quite complicated one. What was the influence on your books of the huge amount of already existing biographical studies on Christina, not to mention fictions, films, and dramas? Did you take account of all those works, or did you try to consider them in order to approach directly Christina's figure? Well, in other words, to be simple, who is your own Christina? Please, Gloria.
Because my approach to Christina for sure is a special one. My approach comes by the Lusitanian Jesuit father Antonio Vieira. So I am each year for 2 or 3 months in Brazil, and there in Brazil is this Jesuit father Antonio Vieira. He lived from 1608 to 1691. He is more or less a saint, and 20 years ago I always heard Antonio Vieira and Christina of Sweden, and I must say till this moment I was not so very interested in Christina. I knew that was this very important point in Innsbruck, the conversion, but then I began to study and to research, and this was really a research without end, because till today it continues. First was this book, and a couple of weeks ago I published a book in Portuguese about this special friendship between Christina and Antonio Vieira. And for me, Christina is such a fascinating female human being, not only a woman, it's more. Yes, I must say this. And I was, for example, a couple of times also in Rome, in the Archivos Secretos, because this friendship was in this way. Antonio Vieira was a Jesuit father, and he was born in Lisbon, 1608, and at the age of 6 years, he came with his parents to Salvador Bahia. And then he grew up in Brazil, and he was in the missions, and he returned to Lisbon. Then he was 10 years as a diplomat all over Europe. And at that time, the Inquisition of Coimbra observed Antonio Vieira very strict, because he always, his sermons were very, very hard and strict against all these forms of exploitation in Brazil, the slavery and all these things. And he fought for that the Jews could come back to Portugal at that time. And so the Inquisition of Coimbra, they were looking for a form to condemn, to bring him to the fire. This was the goal. But it was at that time not possible, because so Antonio Vieira was what we today would say chic or fashionable. His sermons were published in French and also in Portuguese. He didn't write only in Latin. So in the intellectual circles in Europe, the sermons were well known. Also Christina had a couple of pages. So what was in 1669, the Inquisition of Coimbra took Antonio Vieira. For 5 years he was banished to Rome. And he was then in the Engelsburg for 5 years, and at that time Christina just lived in Rome, and just in the moment when she heard, oh, Antonio Vieira is coming, she had a meeting with the Pope and said, please, would this be possible that Antonio Vieira would be my personal preacher or whatever? This was not possible, but according to her principle, Fata viam invenient, destiny found ways and means, and so during the night it was possible for Antonio Vieira to leave the prison and make a walk to Riario, and they had their meetings, and the official reason was he took Italian lessons by Christina, and the result of this friendship are really wonderful sermons and wonderful texts, and also this book.
Jan?
Well, thank you. It's okay. Paolo, to answer your question, everybody knows here that French we sometimes have extravagant ideas, and I started with the idea of writing first a biography, which was an idea, but it had been done many times, so I changed my mind, and I decided that Christina deserved some other way of looking at her. First of all, I felt quite attracted by her modernity, I would say, the way she dealt with people, her decisions, which were sometimes courageous, sometimes critical, and there was also a feeling which was, let's say, the attraction Christina has always had on French people, not only because she invited Descartes to Stockholm. That was the first thing that everybody knows, because unfortunately the poor man died here, not because of the Queen, but because it was very cold. But this being said, that was also, for me, as far as I'm concerned, I would say, the attraction she had remained something we can deal with today. What I would like to say is that her values, the way she is, let's say, interested in other culture, other people, other countries, needless to remember that she spoke fluently 6 or 7 languages. At that time, that was absolutely unusual. And the way also she was, let's say, looking at the world as an open map, where everybody could speak to everybody, and she was not concerned with, let's say, conflicts, wars, because she has had, let's say, she was the first to put an end to the 30 years war, which was quite a political achievement, maybe a main achievement during her career as a queen. And apart from that, when she started the second part of her life, after her abdication, she was clever enough to create a court, an exiled court in Rome, and she became the symbol of Europe enlightenment. And so, there's different aspects. I mean, not only her attraction for other countries and other culture, but also the fact that she was one of the greatest collectors of art of her time. All those things still have a great power of attraction for every one of us.
Stefano.
Well, my interest in Christina, I would say, comes from school time. It's actually where I met Christina first. Studying in Italy, in Genova. My father is Italian, my mother is Swedish. And in school books, you get to learn in Italy that Christina founded Accademia dell'Arcadia. That's a note, usually no more than 2-3 lines, but actually she has her own role in the Italian literary history, which it's quite amazing if you think that she was a Swedish queen, converted to Catholicism and settled in Rome. So this interest started then in seeing how a Swede, actually, in my position as Italo-Svedese, a Swede could actually intervene in Italian literature and make such important achievements. And they were important for real, because Accademia dell'Arcadia is a very important period in Italian literature. Sometimes it is described as the beginning of a modern, maybe it's the wrong word, but at least another approach to language and to culture, with the aim of using a more of moving from Baroque literature and the complex metaphors and complex language. So I guess that my Christina is the Minerva you talked about, Paolo, and but this Minerva, she has two sides. On one side, of course, the historical Christina, the patron of arts, we know, very important in all the fields, art, music, literature, but also the image she wanted herself to give to posterity. And then I guess there are so many Christinas you want to, as you said, all these different characters. On one side, the committed patron, and on the other side, the less glorious images that have been created after her life. So, well, this is more or less my Christina, I would say.
So, thank you. It's quite significant that from this answer there is already an idea of this many Christina, because Gloria Kaiser has mentioned her relation with Antonio Vieira, and so the religious interest in the life of Christina. And then there is the cultural aspect and the connection with the literature in particular. And then there is the very adventurous life of Christina as well, that has quite a strong evidence in your book, Jan. But there is a crucial moment in her life that still seems to me quite difficult to explain, and it's the abdication. I must confess, because I'm not a specialist, that the abdication is still for me quite a black hole, difficult to interpret, to understand. So I would like to know your opinion on this crucial moment. Which are the most important motivations, in your opinion, for this decision that will change completely her life?
I think in Christina the inside development was totally another development than the outside. All her people, her educators, her advisors, they knew totally another Christina, because outside, I think, till her 18-20 year of life, she worked and was like a clockwork. And inside, she was far away of all these obligations. She began, after the death of her father, totally another way. For me, this political reason, I cannot say why she did this, the abdication. But inside for her, it was clear, I have the only intention to go my free way and in my free path, and then she prepared this in secret, more or less, years by years. And she was finished inside in her development. For me, it is incredible to do this self-education, to come to this decision and then to do this, to realize. But I can feel with her. But for sure, never. We had another example in our European history for that action.
Yes, you have pointed out that she has prepared this decision for many years. But how important was the religious aspect in this decision?
For sure, I know also this sentence. Often we read this, now she's fallen in the hands of the Jesuits, for example, to converge from the Protestantism to Catholicism. Perhaps she had also not the right information, this I also say, that, for example, a Copernicus was up on the list of the index. Perhaps, you know. She saw in the, I think, in the with the Catholics more mysticism, and perhaps this would be for her the intention. But the political reason I cannot follow.
Yeah.
Well, I do believe that her decision to abdicate was certainly a bit complicated to summarize in a few words. What I keep in mind is that, and we don't have to forget it, she was surrounded by suitors and potential husbands. And she was supposed to get married and have heir, which was not exactly a cup of tea. She had other ideas. And I think that she took the opportunity of her own interest for religions, not only Catholicism, but also others, to find a way, and that's why she decided to ask Jesuits to come over and discuss with her. She had already had many discussions with Descartes when he was there, and suddenly she realized that it could give a way to change totally a way of being and a destiny. And on the other side, it has to be remembered also that for the Pope, it was a victory he would not have even, let's say, dreamed of. Because can you imagine, let's say, the Minerva of the North, who suddenly leaves her country, decides to abdicate, and comes to Rome. And that was not only one extraordinary victory for Catholicism, but also for, let's say, the Spanish, because the King of Spain was a protector in a decision. And she in that way, she is very close to us, because she looked at her own destiny and decided suddenly that she wanted something else. She had a kingdom, that was one thing for sure, but she wanted to have, let's say, her own destiny and her own path. So it happened maybe the second part of her life, and also she was looked at from, let's say, the Catholic world like someone who has, let's say, she was like a hero for Catholicism, an unexpected hero. And she realized at that moment that when she settled in Rome, she was, let's say, surrounded by a fame, which was not only the fame of the Minerva of the North, but also the lady who was courageous enough to prefer God to her own kingdom. Could you imagine some decision with such an unselfish motive, I would say? Because what would you prefer, the power or the cross? She made up her mind and she chose the cross.
But she, all over her life, she seems to look again for the power. Because in Rome, once in Rome, she tried to become the queen of Polonia or
Naples,
Naples, and so the eagerness to be queen is still alive in her life, all over her life.
But it also means that she was not cut in one go, and that she had, let's say, a lot of facets. We have to accept it and to cope with it. And among the different facets, she looked also at her own interest, because that's one thing to be, let's say, the ex-Queen of Sweden. That's another thing to be in Rome, to have her own court. And if suddenly someone proposed to you, well, by the way, would you like to take the kingdom of Naples? That's a big temptation. Even if you are considered almost as a saint, at least at the very beginning of her staying in Rome. Because after, let's say, the Monaldeschi affair, things have changed quite a lot, and she was looked at in a different way. So maybe the opportunity to take over the kingdom of Naples was something totally unexpected. And she looked at this as not only as an opportunity, but also a way of, let's say, coming back as a queen.
Stefano.
Well, I guess that the best description of her abdication and conversion has, in my mind, been given by Swedish historian Kurt Weibull, that in the 1930s wrote an important book on Christina. And he connected the two reasons. On one hand, as we've been talking about, the impossibility she felt of marrying and giving an heir to the throne. We should keep in mind that Sweden had suffered from a civil war not so many decades before Christina's coming to the throne. So it was very important to settle the dynasty of the Vasa, and Christina was compelled, I would say almost obliged, to give a heir to the throne. And then I guess that the religious aspect is of course also important. In my mind, you don't put up this whole scene across Europe that we still talk so much about today if you don't believe in some of these values. Saying that, I won't say that Christina was an Orthodox Catholic or that she always felt this way, but certainly she was interested in Catholicism, and she was ready to give up much for her faith. So I guess that I always try to think about this way, that in every big decision you make in everybody's life, there are always more than one reason for big steps. So probably this happened to Christina as well, and this helps also to safeguard the cultural aspect, because of course Christina was very much attracted by the Roman context and milieu, and of course religious problems, Galileo's sentence must have scared her. I think she was aware of some of these aspects, of course. But Italian culture had at that time, which for Italians today, it's beautiful to think at least that it had such an appeal, coming not only directly from Italy, you mentioned the Jesuits in Stockholm, but even from France. Prime Minister in France at that time was Mazarin, or Mazzarino, as we sometimes say in Italy. And the Roman values of the Urban VIII, the Pope, Barberini's Pope, a great learned and poet, must for sure have appealed to Christina. So she wouldn't see, I think, Rome as a city that constrained culture, but she was very much appealed by the arts, the music, and the literature. So all of these three reasons, I think, in some way must have played some role in her decision.
Well, there is a very famous biography of Christina written in the 60s by Stolpe. And in this biography, the life of Christina is presented like a series of defeats, in a way. What do you think of this vision? Do you think that the life of Christina has been a series of success? Or do you agree with this quite critical vision that was perhaps inspired by the Catholic vision of Stolpe?
Well, I would say that it was neither a life of unsuccess or a life of success all the way. It was a life of struggle. She had every time to settle on new bases and try to settle her own position in different contexts. But definitely, I would say I disagree most with the Stolpe in this vision he has of Christina as at the end of her life as this feeling of unsuccess, because I don't think that really applies to the case. He's a bit too hard on her. That's my opinion. Even if the books are good and.
But I don't know if you, Jan or Gloria, had the possibility to read this book of Stolpe, or what do you think of this vision, this critical and pessimistic vision of Christina's life as a series of unsuccess?
I think she herself would not say my life either was a success or not. Her life, like she lived, was her own free will, and she was during her whole life alone. This was very hard for her. Outside, not outside. She was always busy but inside, for sure, she was always she suffered from saudade, this loneliness. But I think she had the intention as a young woman to live as a scientist and at the same time as a true believer. And this is what she thought to find in Rome or in the south of Europe. There is this wonderful sentence by Christina. I'm sure, or I believe, that the religion never is against science, but I accept religion is over science. So I think she worked very hard inside to come to a balance with her decision to leave Sweden, to leave the throne, and then always was this acquaintance. Perhaps I could be the Queen of Naples or the Queen of Poland or whatever. But her life was her free will, and this she knew. It was for sure not an easy life.
Yeah.
Well, what makes the life interesting is not only, let's say, success and what you can obtain, but also what you lose, the area in which you don't success. And, well, that's a subtle mixture between, let's say, success and the moment of desperation sometimes. That gives, let's say, its specificity and its interest to everyone's life, not only Queen Christina, but all of us. It's not a one way and a path and a road with only lights on the road. It's made up of many different things, and it gives to each of us a way of being, let's say, either satisfied with ourselves or unsatisfied.
Christina has been many times defined as a rebel, as a model of a woman that chooses her way with a very strong will of independence. But according to you, according to your research, to your vision, which was her attitude towards women? She expressed some ideas about the role of women in society, for instance. Considering that in that times we know very well which was the role and the idea of women.
I think for me, Christina was a clear European. During her time, she didn't recognize this is clear, but she lived the whole Europe in case of her languages, 7, 8 cultures, the North and the South. And the Protestantism and Catholicism. So in this way, for sure, she's a role model or whatever with we could call her a symbol, an emblem, a European.
Yes, but this is what perhaps we perceive now, but I wonder if she herself expressed some ideas about women in society at her time.
I think her decision that she will not get married was also very clear. She had her experiences, and then, thank you very much. And so I could not find in my research clear messages for women. I think for her this was not so important to think as a woman or to think as a man. So this is for me the reason why I always say she was a female human being.
Yes.
Well, I totally agree with Gloria. Gloria has just said, because I don't think that she looked at herself as, let's say, being a woman and, let's say, having the same rights than a man. She was first the Queen of Sweden. That was one thing, and she never conceived her life as being, let's say, the ex-Queen of Sweden. That was one thing. And she behaved in a way which for her was totally natural. She had, let's say, her own way of speaking, her own way of thinking, and she was very strong in her beliefs, even though she decided sometimes to worship one thing and then to reject it, and she did it sometimes with people also. But that was, let's say, a way of feeling free. And in that respect, we can look at her from a very close way, because it gives her modernity for us, because it would be exaggerate to make her, let's say, the first woman who has ever expressed her wishes and her will so clearly. It would be to look at her from a modern prospect, but she looked at herself as someone who could do whatever she wanted and who could act like a man. Do you agree on that?
Well, of course, I agree on the vision of Christina as a rebel. Maybe it's a strong word, but surely I think that some of the popes, we should bear in mind that there were 4 popes Christina met during her lifetime in Rome, would certainly have called her a rebel. I think so, because she was, for them, difficult to cope with sometimes. But of course, rebel is maybe too strong a word, and doesn't apply maybe for that period. But talking about women and her relationship or her vision of women in society, that I would say is very twofold, because on one side she's very critical in her biography and in some of her maxims. She's clearly, I would say, not at all the idea of Christina we have today, because she tends to, she really seeks to avoid company of women, and she is clearly interested in the company of men. She finds them more learned, the conversation with them more interesting. So I would say that maybe she is in some way settling her own unique position as a woman, as a reigning woman. She doesn't want, for instance, to mention Elizabeth I at all, which could have been an example for her, but she avoids on purpose to compare herself with her. But on the other hand, and that probably is the most important part of Christina's achievement and heritage, she had a very strong and important, how you say, image, a very strong model for women entering culture, and especially in what is my specialty, in the academic domain. Because Christina, even if no women were allowed in her own academy, It was only for male members. But the academies that gave birth, so that Christina's Academy gave birth to, this Accademia dell'Arcadia, was the first one in Italy to accept women. And the women had a very important role as poets in the life of the Academy, looking up to Christina. So Christina became, I would say, a model for women participation to culture in Italy at the end of the 16th century and in Rome, which is a very important achievement on our side.
So, well, in order to approach the general theme of today for a Europe of culture, my question is, which is her importance for the contemporary European culture today? It's really possible to make Christina a model of a symbol of the cultural heritage, because I would like to be a little critic and provocative. I mean, she became a Catholic. She chose to be faithful to his idea of an absolutist monarchy. She seems to belong to the past, in a way, in her choices. And I wonder, how can we choose Christina as a model for today and as a symbol of European culture?
I think on Christina we see the possibility, the capacity to renew always the own strengths, because more or less each decade she was rejuvenated. And for me, like her favorite in the mythological animals, like a phoenix, she always come again and again of the ashes. And so I think like the phoenix could be a symbol or emblem for Europe. Christina should be our symbol or emblem, because this capacity to renew the strengths and begin anew, this is typically also for the culture of Europe. We had in Europe a lot of wars. The first attempt to unite Europe with the Roman Imperium collapsed, we know, and then 2,000 years always we tried again to unite.
So her
And
capacity
we
to change is in a
and
way.
now we hope with such an emblem or such a symbol like Christina, this we will come to a good end with the United
her
States.
symbol was the phoenix, no?
Yeah, the phoenix, to come always as
have a new birth
yes,
from.
Yes. So for me, she is a symbol and an emblem, like the phoenix.
Yeah.
I don't know if she can be a symbol for Europe, but what is sure is that the way she was, her thirst for knowledge, as something and some values that can be quite close to European values. And when I speak of thirst for knowledge, I also have in mind, let's say, the way she placed art on top of every single value, because for her, art was a link between nations and minds, between people and kingdoms at that time. And she didn't consider art in itself as, let's say, the simple fact of amassing paintings, let's say Flemish painters, great British artists. She was not, if I can make a comparison between Louis XIV at that time and Christina. Louis XIV was building his own image as a symbol of glory and magnificence for himself. And Versailles was the stage on which every day Louis XIV was the main actor of the stage. And Christina's purpose was totally different. She liked to have, let's say, the best masterpieces of art, whatever be the nation. She liked, let's say, English painting, French cabinet makers. She liked Italian musicians, and that was a way, let's say, of gathering every single culture. In that respect, that one then can be, let's say, the first approach to one common European value. And the second one is, for me, a tolerance for different opinions and different religions. So, in her time, it was unusual, let's say, to care for minorities, and she cared for minorities. She sided close to minorities, and if we take an example, for instance, she was, let's say, not only advised by Jewish, but also she owed them a lot of money. And so she stood up for Jewish. She stood up for Protestant when Louis XIV was making war against Protestant in France at that time. And she was a Catholic, and she was sustaining the Protestant in France. So it's a way of, let's say, being not only the ex-Queen of Sweden or the Queen of Rome, but a way of looking at her own position from a very high point. You know, she was, let's say, on top of Europe in a way, because she didn't belong to any party. Mm. So that's also interesting for me.
Stefano?
I agree on tolerance, and I agree on Christina uniting Europe, because I think what we see today and what we are in desperately need of is some kind of agreement between the North and the South of Europe. And that is something that she achieved as a Swede with a German mother. She came to Italy, made substantial, important things for Italian culture, but not only a connection with Spain, France, not least. So Christina is a personality that unites different aspects of Europe. So I would say that even if it's true, she belongs to the past. The 17th century was very much different from today, and she is a representative of absolutism. But this aspect of tolerance is a way in which she opened up her academy to different viewpoints, and the fact that she tries to settle a treaty between Spain and France. She had still, as you mentioned, in Rome, a political activity and effort. So the way in which she unites Europe, I think, so maybe she could be a good symbol, I would say.
So I would like perhaps to give the audience the possibility to express their questions to our guests. So I wonder if there is any question.
I would like to ask Gloria Kaiser, the Amazone from Rome, and her interesting adventurous life. I wonder if you study Antonio Vieira. That is, of course, not so adventurous, more than in the mind, perhaps. But do you also have found other aspects of her life in Rome that is going to relate?
Yeah, this literary biography is not only about the friendship between Christina and Antonio Vieira, but it is the novel or the biography about the whole life. And it's clear also about other situations in Rome and about the Monaldesco affair. And it is the whole life. You could find the whole life about Christina in this novel.
Sounds very interesting. And also I would like to ask Giancarlo, I read your book somewhat and was surprised that you invent new meetings with people that she never really met. Important European figures that, as you know, she never really met. And I wonder, why did you take this move? Did you find her real life not interesting enough for your vision? Or why did you do meetings?
No, of course. course, I didn't find a life interesting enough, but you know, I think as a writer you have a freedom, a total freedom to deal with your characters. You can kill them at the first page. That would be a very bad idea because that would be no novel at all. You can, let's say, invent meetings which never took place, and you can add whatever you want. That's a terrible liberty, which can, of course, lead you nowhere at all. But you know, I would like to ask you a question. What is important? To tell the truth, or to make you dream, or to make you, let's say, escape from your own life? You know, that's the purpose of every single writer. We want people to, let's say, dream and have, what do you expect? All of you, what do you expect? You expect a page turner or a book you cannot, let's say, read up to maybe 10 pages and then you are fed up with it. I don't think that's the purpose of lecture, because first of all, there are very few people really read, at least in France today. So my idea was, let's say, to take Christina's life and to be as close as possible to history as needed, and then, let's say, to invent some other, let's say, figures who will meet her during her lifetime and who will, let's say, sustain the plot. Did I answer well to your question?
Of course, as a historian, I know that we have to be tied to our footnotes. It's very frustrating sometimes that you have to have this load of responsibility to always tell the truth, which is sometimes very emulating when one knows that there is so much more that you couldn't say. But most of the time, when people write biographies or novelistic biographies, they still use the characters that are in the play. They don't invent new characters that never have actually appeared. You can have a conversation between Christina and Descartes, and the conversation is completely fictional. But you don't bring in Madame Marcel, who she never met. You don't do that, but you bring in other characters. So this is a new kind of a new way, but maybe it gives you more freedom to invent conversations that are more attuned to what you want to express with them.
But don't you think that we are all liars? I mean, in real life, we all lie. You know, not every day, maybe 10 times a day. But you know, I think that writers have to be forgiven, let's say, for the lies, just for the sake of, let's say, for the sake of writing. That's our freedom, and so that's why I don't think that there is a real sin to invent new characters in a novel. That's the purpose of the novel itself. Yes, madam.
Mats?
I have a question to Stefano and maybe also to Jan, because as a symbol we need Christina, maybe, as a European symbol. I fully advocate this. And then the border between her historical life and the potential of her influence is, of course, not so important for us contemporary. For us contemporary is the potential of her symbol, tolerance, living together in Europe. That is much more important than actually tying this to days and fiction and places. But my question is rather, in her lifetime as a queen, she was of course mostly dealing with crowned heads that were all men around her by nature of the conditions of that time. But where she could influence the rules, like in Academia Arcadia, was that open to everyone? What is the status of this Academia? Was it open to everyone?
Well, no, it wasn't. Her academy was open to men. The academy that was inspired by Christina's own academy, the one she wrote her statues for, Academia dell'Arcadia, that came the year after her death. On the idea, I think, of the first Custode Generale, the first how do you say, secretary? It's not a very good translation, but Giovanni Maria Crescimbeni, the academy was opened to women as well. And there I think that Christina, that was chosen, that is important to bear in mind, she was chosen as the posthumous patron of the academy. So when Accademia dell'Arcadia started meeting, it was really in Queen Christina's anda, as you would say in Swedish, in her spirit, in her for her heritage. So I guess that if Christina has the possibility, the potentiality to become some kind of symbol because of these good qualities, I would say tolerance, culture, the fact that she unites different parts of Europe, that should be, of course, a symbol that is the possibility to be criticized and all continually being discussed. Because, of course, there is something maybe that we will talk about during the afternoon, but if we have to be totally anachronistic, I'm very much sure that Christina wouldn't have liked the Turkish participation in the European Union, because she was trying to build, so she has to be discussed all the time and on all levels, but maybe with the richness of Europe is the different voices, the different languages, the different backgrounds. So we have all the time to discuss between each other, and discussing the critical points, Catholicism, the fact that she belongs to the past also, but even discussing these positive values that she inspired then, giving access to women with her image, to women, to culture. But even, as I said, some more critical and negative parts. I don't know if it's a good answer.
Yeah.
I would like to add something to Matt's question. First of all, we have to keep in mind, especially for French citizens that I am, that the French Academy only opened its doors a few years ago to women. That was Marguerite Yourcenar, who was the first academician to be admitted in France. And even though the academy dated back to the 17th century, we have had to wait for the second part of the 20th century to admit women. So just to keep it in mind.
Une dame, madame.
Karin Fabricius, Doctor of Literature from Stockholm University. I would like to put a few very basic questions to all of you. I'm very honored to be here. I admire you very much. It's very enjoyable. Very basic questions. Until last century, women couldn't have any property at all. And most people couldn't read and write. At the time of Christina, how many women at all could read and write? Because that is putting her, does make her a bit outstanding. So could you please enlighten me to it?
This we always have to recognize that 1650 and in these decades the majority of people were not able to read, and especially the women, and so she was privileged in case of her education, in case of all. But this was the reason that she lived at that time as with her free will, with her own decision, she went her own path, and she lived all these attitudes, what we now heard, this tolerance, and she was not a thinker in small things. For her, Europe was not, this is Vienna and this is the other city. Europe was Europe, and she walked from one culture to the other with her knowledge about all these languages. It's clear she was an example, and she was far ahead of her time.
Can I ask the panelists, in the end, after studying that very special figure, how would you characterize the relationship of Christina to her country, Sweden?
Well, if I may, I would say at least complex. She was still in economic, sustaining, even if the payments of the rents she had kept in the Abdication Act, the taxes from the city of Norrköping, for example, Gotland, and there are some persons in the audience that knows this better than me. But so she had this still important relationship with Sweden, always on an economic side. Of course, she left the country and she left the religion of the state. And at that time, this was a big movement. But still, I would like to say that some travelers, some Swedes coming to Rome were, to say welcome in a palace, maybe it's a big word, but I would still say, that's my feeling more than something I know for certain, that she still kept feelings for the country, and she had also an idea of the country having been a part of that Europe she had moved to, not so long before her time. So I don't say she had the idea of Sweden becoming Catholic again. That would have been impossible, but she still had many ties with Sweden. That I think you could say.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to come back to the main theme, which is Christina, the symbol of European culture and identity. And I was thinking about another queen, which has a lot of points in common with Christine, but that nobody would dream of making her a symbol of the European identity. That's Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great changed religion, she changed country, she wrote music, she invited scientists to Petersburg. She was one of the greatest collectors of art, since the Hermitage today is still filled up with the paintings that people bought for in France and another country. So but yet we would not see her as a symbol of European identity, Christ, and culture. What is then the difference? Could it be that what you've described Christine, but you've not put her into context? The great difference that in 1660 Europe is in crisis. Germany is in ruin, the revolution in England, Spain is on decline. Actually, it's only the Polish and Lithuanian Union which stands as an obstacle between the Ottoman power, which is trying to make more and more into Europe. Could it be that the greatest thing is that she succeeded in doing what she did in a situation which socially, economically, and politically was quite difficult? Europe was not really a country, a part of the world group, which in 1760, 100 years later, it's totally different. There's a lot of richness and wealth in Europe, which in 1660 was a country. How much is the context? I mean, a validation of the idea of making a symbol for European culture and identity.
Perhaps I try it only with one sentence. Perhaps the symbol could be not only Christina, that the symbol could be the phoenix, her favorite mythical animal. Because I think these forces to renew always, these are forces of our continent, of Europe. And this she lived. She sometimes began anew in her life. And this is typically for Europe. Because the strengths to unite Europe are 2,000 years old. And now we have, I think, one of the last chances to begin anew, like the phoenix. And the phoenix is one part of Christina, perhaps in this sense.
Yes?
That's exactly what I was thinking about, because we are in crisis today. And all proposal for European Union, from Pierre Dubois in 1311 all the way to Lenin in the 1940s, have occurred in a situation where Europe is in crisis. There was a crisis in Europe in 1650, 1660, and that would give the legitimacy to her as a symbol, as an anthem of European renewal, rebirth. So
and we have to, yes, we have to begin anew like the phoenix of the ashes. Is my opinion.
I like the ideas.
Yes.
I have a question to Stefano. My name is Per Hakos, and I'm very interested in maxims and aphorisms. And like Christina, I like La Rochefoucauld very much. Some questions about this. If Christina had lived today, would she have been on Twitter then? Would she have Twitter? That's one question. Another question is, what's the difference between poetry and maxims and aphorisms?
The second one is, I thought the first one was more difficult, but both of them are really difficult. Yes. Saying that I'm not at all an expert in the maxims, and what I've been writing mostly about is sonnets. And actually, Susanna Åkerman, that just she, when discussing my thesis, we talked about the fact that I didn't maybe take into consideration too much the maxims, and I should have, really, because they are interesting. The only problem with them is that the maxim, as far as I know, is such a short sentence and contains so much in it that sometimes her maxims tend to say against each other, because they are, of course, written during a long period of time, and this particularity of the maxim concentrating so much significance in a very short sentence does that sometimes they're a bit bewildering to use to give a broader context, a broader significance. That, I hope, will do somehow for the second question. For the first one, it's difficult to say, but she, well, I mean, Barack Obama, I think, uses Twitter a lot. She liked to be in the center, so why not? And she liked, she was up to date, so yes, I think she would be Twittering today.
Yes?
Without having read any of your books, I could imagine that you have all maybe a section where you discuss or talk about discussions between Christina and the cat, and how do you value the period and influence you have on her and the decision she took.
First of all, I would like to say that she was really interested in Descartes coming to Stockholm, because in a way it gave her an opportunity to be looked at in a different way from France, because she was known as the daughter of Gustave Adolphe, and that was one thing, but she was not yet known as the Minerva of the North. And in a way, she used Descartes' fame for herself, and she also learned a lot from him in a lot of areas, mathematics, physics, science, religion also, certainly, because they discussed that point. But this being said, you know, we used to think that after a while, Descartes was left in some part of this castle and totally forgotten. I don't know whether it's true or not, because I wasn't there at that time, even if I look old. But what I would like to say is that she has had a lot of interest in Descartes, and then afterwards she was infatuated with Leibniz and Spinoza, So she was, that was part of her thirst for knowledge. But he has undoubtedly quite a big influence when she met him, because she was still quite young. And even though she had been brought up to become a queen, her interests were so wide that he was, let's say, part of her interest at that time. I don't know whether I answer properly your question.
The final question, because then we have to, please.
My French literature history said, le climat le tua. The climate killed him. That's the sum up of Descartes in Stockholm. But this is, of course, not true. It's a great shame that Sweden hasn't yet taken up the biggest contribution to European civilization that Descartes and that period brought, namely the ballet de cour that Christina tried to bring back to Sweden, and that Descartes, well, an American has criticized the idea, but we believe that Descartes wrote the libretto for the famous ballet Freds Hour, the conception of peace after the Great War, and that we had brought French musicians to Sweden, as Gustav Adolf had brought German musicians to Sweden in order to get music up to the European level, which we did already in those days. And we have never taken back that wonderful ballet onto the stage. And this is the great shame for us. And this confidence we tried in the wonderful symposium in Tartu on Charlier to bring them. They brought some music to that. And I can give you a libretto and a score with the parts for the musicians for this ballet. And if this is one result of this conference, I can die in peace.
But, you know, we have here in front of us a specialist of ballet that is working now in Paris.
Well, a specialist to be. I hope I'm working on Christina's ballet during a reign. Of course, one of the most important is La Naissance de la Paix, Freds Hour. And the discussion about Descartes having written the whole of the libretto or some verses of it is difficult to solve. I don't think it is possible. But what is sure, and there we can settle an important thing he did. He sent the libretto to France.
I will invest you more with it.
Yes, but that was not a minor thing to do, because this shows the way these ballets were circulating around the courts, and how this libretto had, as one of its main aims, to show what was happening at the Swedish court and communicating important major political decisions. So if the music is there, I think it would be a wonderful idea to put it on scene and necessary. The problem is with the dance, but some French dance companies are doing these wonderful spectacles, Christine Bell, I think, which is a spectacle in Paris at the Center for Dance. So the possibilities are there. I'm working only on the poetry with the poor knowledge about the music and the dance. I couldn't help too much on that, but it would be wonderful if this could happen.
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to ask that we are, the Royal Palace Music Festival of this building, open to the concept that was proposed to the French Institute this year. We'll do it next year, I hope. You know about the music that was performed to Queen Christina, performed by specialists from France and Brussels and Austria. We are welcoming this project, and when I hear about this, I didn't know that the libretto and music together existed of this piece. But now that I know it, I can just say, if I can influence the continuation of the Royal Festival, you are welcome.
Thank you to our guest. Well, I can't draw any conclusion because, I mean, it could be too difficult, but the image that I will keep after this debate of Christina is a Christina that perhaps will twittering today, who knows, that has left a very important heritage in many different fields, a woman that had a very strong thirst of knowledge, that cared for minority, and that had a very strong engagement for arts. All these elements makes her a symbol of Europe. Thank you very much.